Post your requests. This is my unbiased analysis, my thoughts I'm going to share with you with all the behavioural elements from the Netflix documentary, The Crash. It's not about the entire situation or the related criminal cases or the depth of evidence presented, those sort of items. I'm going to share some of my summary thoughts, and then I'll follow that by some of the sample clips throughout the documentary where we see some of those behavioural deviations shown. The only other items that I've seen in regards to this, I was sent 2 links. One was a link to a YouTube video where there was a review of where it was the police body cam footage immediately post the incident. During that time, aside from them working around the vehicle, there was a very short debrief that they did in the ambulance with Mackenzie, where the only probably standout item for there that would be important to note is she was mentally present enough to clarify names, residential status, even to correct pronunciation of names, I think, which is a bit indicative there. The other video is post Mackenzie's arrest, where her parents attended the police station. At that time, her mother was deceptive to police. She tried to say that the phone that they had taken was her phone, not Mackenzie's, and that she was saying that she needed to get that back. Now, at the same time that was occurring, firstly, police verified that it wasn't the mother's phone, it was Mackenzie's. And secondly, her father was just purely focused on ensuring that she was not asked any questions of any sort. So in other words, the focus then, give me that phone back that may have content on it, and Mackenzie's not allowed to speak to anybody. They were advised that she was over 18, to which the father's response was words to the effect that they're all dumb, meaning at that age. That's really the limit of the details with that second link, and the content out of there is more reflective of the parents' behaviour, not in regards to additional specifics on Mackenzie's behaviour, potential motivation, actions, decisions, these sort of things. I think it's prudent for me to share my initial thoughts on the Potts statement as well, which, based on the summary for some of those specific information, let's just talk about some of the factual things, would be basically impossible to be true. There was numerous physical skills, such as steering realignment. She physically moved the gear, regardless of how it came out, back into gear, as well from neutral back into drive, whilst travelling at top speed. Now, the thing is, on top of that, continual foot pressure down on the gas pedal as well, which is muscular extension for doing that. A message going out in muscular extension. If she had relaxed, if she had fainted, if she had episode, that would logically decrease. Now, any one of those individual items makes the Potts suggestion unlikely. The combination of all of them, in my opinion, makes it ludicrous. From what I reviewed some of the other elements, I believe Mackenzie likely knows far more details than what she shared. I think her verbal and her non-verbal behaviours align with output, and we're going to do some breakdowns throughout here as well. Also, with regards to her mum and dad, I think it's important to mention about some of the ways that they were communicating. The mum and dad were quite well rehearsed for these things you saw. They'd finish ends of each other's sentence with a confirmation nod. That's written, practiced elements. They were speaking in the short clustered words at the same time, which we do when we're doing something that we've read. I've got to say, throughout, for different elements, they seem to be quite image management focused, and that's a bit of a recurring theme. Now, the focus on that, rather than on the corrective behaviour from things, is likely what stemmed the lack of action from things from school and other items, as we heard throughout. There was a couple of times throughout where the mum would over-exaggerate facial expressions for things as well, and she was non-congruent with a range of items. For those who haven't heard my stuff before, non-congruent is we're saying one thing, but our body is leaking another thing. When the father discussed her smoking pot, he leaked a facial micro-expression twice, under half a second each. He was continually shaking his head as he was saying that he was okay with it. From these items as well, the focus continued on about likely being image management, rather than, like you're from there, focusing on that to try and make sure there was nothing out that was going to more negatively affect people's perception of the daughter's activities. That's also why he likely did mention the mushrooms, that they were aware and across as well. When they're interviewing the parents, you saw the mum was showing some self-pacifying gestures that repeat self-touching, especially as the father tried to discuss and minimise the elements as well about the drug issues. Likely because knowing that any discussion on that has got some negative element, negative focus. The really standout item as well was the dad saying, "I know if my daughter lies." Really non-congruent for like at this perspective as well. I know that when the mum said that she wasn't a bad child, the father had the eyes closed for a period. We call this eye-blocking behaviour. Eye-blocking behaviour when there's something negative that we either want to remove ourselves from, we don't want to take in. Like the ostrich putting their head in the sand. Now, some other points I need to mention in there. Mackenzie's interview at the end, and you can see as I'm trying to do this, my dog's got the zoomies, which is always, well, Jesus. She showed a contempt facial micro expression as soon as she entered the interview. immediately after sitting down. It's the only one-sided facial expression, and realistically showing contempt of these items is not really congruent with her trying to show grief and to show remorse, if that's her true intent. You see verbally as well with that final interview, she had deliberately softened, slowed speaking cadence, changed tone compared to what we saw in so many clips and so many other interactions. It was likely storytelling trying to put forward once again just for that image management. Now, during the discussion there, during the interview, when the interviewer asked her about arguments with Dom, you saw more of the eye-blocking behaviour. We get different versions of that. Some people will put their hands over their eyes. Some people will close their eyes for longer periods of time. There's a range of different ways we see that. Likely because she didn't want to focus on saying things what may worsen public appearance. Now, I haven't got time to go right into eye reference point, but it's where we go for different things as we're focusing. Her eye reference point wasn't where it was earlier aligned. We've got episodic and semantic memory. Episodic is things we've experienced, and for her, that was around 2 o'clock. There was elements during the interview when she was asked things, she would go to a different point, and coupled with some other indicators, was likely creating some of the different elements there. And especially we saw elements of that flash and leak when it said about there was some arguments, but we'd be cool later. Now, when you saw that she was asked about the pots as well, there was a pre-rehearsed statement just to try and convince. Now, let's be really practical here. As some of the people I've trained with say as well, truth tellers convey, liars convince. You don't need to convince if you're innocent. She was deliberately non-committal and deliberately detached in nature. Then at the end of the interview, the part that we saw is from the camera when the solicitor there, she completely dropped the semi-sadness expression and directly turned to her lawyer about the perception of what had been said. The image focus. I don't want to come across as crazy and pushing these things too much. Even her phrasing and the non-verbal, I have excessive remorse for Dominic, Davion, and their families. Touching the table on those 3 points again, she's going through an action item list. That is not somebody showing remorse. That's practice bullet points for these things to try and make sure she sticks to scripts, just like another one of her TikToks. I'm sure more is going to come out, especially as people apply for content under freedom of information and other things come forward. But the final note before I show some of these clips that I haven't heard anybody mention or anything in comments, give some consideration to what Dom actually really may have meant to Mackenzie. Not just a partner or a friend, but the provider of high value, high profile branded gifts. This has been validated throughout. So if he was potentially leaving her, it further means the potential removal of access to these items that she directly aligned with her identity, aligned to her public profile. And based on different elements of her personality shown, whilst this may be horrific for people to process, that may have been a potential driver for actions that she may have taken. Here's some of the breakdown. Here's some of the examples of the behaviour of Mackenzie, her parents, and others that they've leaked throughout this documentary. Thanks. Some bits and pieces now for some of the things that I see. Here's a first bit that I've got to say stands out for me a little bit.
Babe, what did they tell you? Nothing. Okay, she was life flighted here.
Yeah, I wouldn't know that.
Okay. No.
What was this?
You want to sit down?
Oh my god. Oh, dear.
Wait till you say this.
Do you notice the space? I mean, I'm just thinking, and I would hate for anyone to even think or place themselves in that position, but if there's a circumstance there that you are next to and your partner's right there, and there's a potential negative thing, my natural response would be to gravitate and sit next to them. So I've got to say straight off the bat, just for me, I'm just sharing some observations for that as well. I don't take that as being natural.
Because she was just going through so much.
The police started asking her questions, okay? And then I said, wait, I think we need to get a lawyer. Because I know, you remember, you said, don't say anything to them without getting a lawyer. Mm-hmm. And he goes, okay, we won't ask you any more questions.
So
a couple of things I'll mention there about that. You saw as soon as I started talking about them with the lawyer, we got that chin duck that we get that I've mentioned to you before about when we have some changes of discomfort level, we cover that vulnerable area. You saw them for the first time as well with the father, the deviation there. When you've heard me talk about self-pacifying gestures, repeat self-touching, physical movements, we do that to try and get some more calm, to reduce blood pressure, reduce heart rate, a range of these sort of things. You saw that doing that at the same time then with the father as he was stone-faced, doing the repeated self-touching there, clearing that space in front of him when talking about that. So the element about why we all of a sudden needed to call a lawyer and that change, I think is something they're concerned about from a perception point of view, which is why you saw some behavior changes in both of them.
So then the police attempted to get access to her cell phone.
That's when he asked me for the passcode.
So,
Of course we gave it. Go ahead. Go search whatever you want.
So I think it's worthwhile mentioning in this part as well, you heard me mention at the start of my video, that I got sent another link when they got into the police station and where the parents, where the mother had lied and saying, no, that's my phone, it's not Mackenzie's phone. Whereas here in this spot with the documentary saying, oh, of course we said, you know, we've got nothing to hide. So once again, saying from the image that they're trying to put forward that there's been nothing done wrong here by Mackenzie. But obviously we know that completely changes tact when she's actually arrested.
Always super healthy. It was always organic. Dom would buy her clothes.
Oh, and I always look like the skim ship is smaller. I got that in the back though.
Oh yeah, this is cute too. It looks like it's gonna fit me. Super cute.
He really loved like designer stuff and just name brand.
Oh my gosh. Dom, no you didn't. These are Gucci's.
Okay, baller.
the boy wasn't hurting for money, okay?
So part of that, when we're saying that about the brand items and why I shared that bit, aside from you see the female light up when they're talking about this thing from money and the items that came along with that, was part of that is putting up for consideration that any breakup in relationship wouldn't just mean a relationship ending. It could mean potential lack of access to these sort of things as well. So that's why I thought I'd mention that. People need to make up their own decisions for that, but it's obviously one of many potential factors.
And then that's it.
That's it.
She was trying to remember, like she's trying, like, Mackenzie, you can't, it's not there. It's just not there.
So there'll be other parts of that. That's one of the first times we saw the eye blocking behavior from her father with the eyes closing. Now, eye blocking behavior we get when it's a difficult situation. So I'm not specifically saying that at that time if they're being deceptive, but from the indicator point of view, that's it. So repetition of the final part of the sentence, which is in other words for that full stop, is likely once again a pre-rehearsed line that they've said that they've had for that. That's why they're responding that way. And you saw the eye blocking behavior as well with the eye closure. So that could be once again that there's some other elements or more intent behind this than what is truly getting shared. It's worthwhile me mentioning, I know that I've got a range of questions that came through and about the drug use and potential effect of the drug use. As I said, the videos that I do, this is about the behavioural elements. The fact they found THC in a system and nothing else from there. We need to only specifically talk about with these videos the behaviours that we see, the behaviour deviations that we're seeing. There's a lot of people out there specialising in collating and sharing the evidence, and that's where people should focus some of their attention if that's where really you want to have the focus, or if that's something where you have some more questions.
I knew she smoked dope. I don't have a problem with her smoking dope. I don't have a problem with me smoking. I don't have a problem with you smoking it. If you're going to take a drug, that's the one I believe you should take. You know, it's better than alcohol. It's better than all the other crap in smoking dope. I don't have a problem.
Okay, so I'm going to rewind and zoom in on this so you see this. Firstly, you're going to see when he does this again, that there is a one-sided shoulder shrug. And then I want you to watch the mum rubbing on her arm at the only time now.
I knew she smoked dope. I don't have a problem with her smoking dope. I don't have a problem with me smoking. I don't have a problem with you smoking it. If you're going to take a drug, that's the one I believe you should take. You know, it's better than alcohol. It's better than all the other crap. You know, she's not shooting up.
So the reason I mention that is, firstly, you saw, and well, it was slight, the one-sided shoulder shrug. When people have a one-sided shoulder shrug after sharing information, showing that they're not really connected to those words. Additionally, with the mum, you saw the rubbing on the elbow there. We call that self-pacifying gestures. So when people have stress or discomfort, the brain says to the body, I've got some stress, can you try and soothe me? And so the body is calming the brain by repeat physical elements. So we see these things when it's not part of somebody's baseline. We haven't seen it earlier with the mum's behavior, but saw that then around the drugs. Likely because of the fact, aside from the outcome, but also from the image point of view. So I think that the combination of those items is why you saw the discomfort there with the parents. And we're talking about image management. For a father who, from what I believe was a school teacher, saying, I don't have a problem with a smoking pot, I don't have a problem with me, you smoking pot, the additional filler fluff words is just trying to convince. Truth tellers convey, liars convince. He's trying to convince people that it's not a bad thing. He's just focused on image management.
Police called to set up an interview. And I was like, I'm not doing it. People always say the police will like try to say crazy things, especially if you're like alone and you're a teenager. It doesn't seem like we're trying to figure out what happened in the accident.
So a couple of things around there. Firstly, saying about the police, people always say, so that's a really general statement. That's just somebody who just didn't want to speak to the police and is trying to deviate that. The other reason when you see there as well about, oh, they're just trying to find the next drug dealer, based on some of the circumstances we're talking about here with marijuana and mushrooms, that's more likely Rosie just trying to make sure she protected any element or involvement she may have had with that circumstance. But from what we see here, obviously, as soon as Netflix came calling those, she had no problems coming through and sharing things there. So once again, it just leads to giving some indication as to people's true character and true intent.
Conversations and just sitting around. And we were also talking about doing the mushrooms. But then by the time they got over, it was like 12 a.m. And we're all like, it's too late.
So no mushrooms?
Yeah, we were all just kind of like, it's really late. And we had like weed to smoke, so we just smoked weed.
So note there, no response. Saying about there's no mushrooms, yeah, we just, and went in another deviation to talk about that as well. So if you ask me, do I think that it's likely some of them partook of mushrooms during that evening and that she's curbing her words there from an image management point of view? Yes, I believe that that would be likely there. Otherwise, she would have been short and honest. Short, sharp, truthful answers are the best.
All I remember is Dom just like petting her head all night and just like cuddling up to her on the couch, and she was sleeping and he was just like caressing her hair.
So a couple of concerns with that. One, she's already said about the fact she remembered the colouring book, some of the things, and people were saying what was getting watched for it as well, which was a normal thing. Now, all she remembers is Don, is Don rubbing her hair and whatever else. That is her trying to be limiting with what she's saying about the amount of content that she actually would know about the evening or any other related circumstances, in my opinion.
Toyota traveling southbound, and it begins to make a right turn. As it traveled west for nearly a half mile, there was a slight bend where the second piece of video evidence comes from.
So let's talk about that for a second. What we know from the previous part that had been shared with their friends on the Life 360 app, that I think that he was on his phone 1 minute before the crash. We're talking about a half-mile road here, where the commencement of that started with a very slow, considered indicator, very methodical turn. Then within a half mile, we've seen also now specifically that it's not a straight road. There is bends and turns across like you're from that point of view, and then the final thing that happens. So in regards to the question, the statement, things that will be coming up about pots, to clarify here and what was shown for the vehicle's black box, for want of a better phrase, the vehicle had no braking, constant acceleration, was taken out of and then back into gear, aside from a driving point of view, for going on and staying center within that road. Those are things that take some element of cognitive awareness, of mental presence, of acting, decision making, under, even if it was a duress circumstance, if there was fights going in the car. So that's showing that mental, like I said, cognitive awareness and presence for doing those sort of things. And I think that's something that is relatively clearly evidenced.
On my calculations, the Toyota averaged approximately 97.8 mile per hour through this stretch right here. That's beyond unsafe speed for the roadway and conditions.
So you saw that then, that was a bend across from one way up, across and then down before it goes to a straight again. They were at 99 miles per hour during that period. That takes, as I said, cognitive awareness, fine motor skills for the steering, let alone for anything else. That's somebody who's present and aware at that time. Now, I'm going to share just an observation here from this point. If you hear just before it happens, there's a squeal of tyres. Now, we know that there was continual acceleration. We know that there was no braking, so it's neither of those. That's a steering adjustment for that time, like that's slightly like occurred likely. That's what's made those wheels scream, squeal during that part just before the crash. So I'm sure the professionals in that area will be looking for those, but just from a practical point of view, from things that we see and hear, that would be something else that ideally should be explained.
There was an incident that happened They suspended her for the last day of school. I had to get off work and come get her. And I walked in, I looked at my daughter, and she's sobbing. And I go, did you do it? She looked at me and goes, no. And I know when my daughter lies. I go, good enough for me, let's go. And I walked her out.
Okay, so multiple parts were there. One, you saw they're talking about the daughter's behavior and how she was. He's already smiling. It's like, this is, oh, she's a little bit notorious, dangerous, whatever else. He's already smiling. When they said about that as well, about you saw about the mum, when they said about the daughter sobbing, and the mum went, once again, some fake element like of over-exaggerated theatrical type sadness. What you were seeing there when you're seeing a parent smile about their daughter acting in this way. I want to add another line as well that was very clear there. I know when my daughter's lying. We call that non-congruence. When people, that we need to make sure and check for when the non-verbals across a range of channels to see when there's alignment between verbals and non-verbals. And we look for a range of things there. But you're seeing during the time when the father's saying that, aside from the smiling element and aside from then the part with the lying, you're getting a real indication there that they didn't have control. They weren't in a situation where there was elements of discipline there. And so acting in that way, likely she hasn't had a behavior curbed for a whole range of related items.
What? Am I a perfect parent? No. No one is. No one is. So, I mean, have I made some mistakes with my kids? Sure. It's life, you know?
But she wasn't a bad kid. She didn't really need to be disciplined a whole lot. You know, doing her worst is her mouth.
So, similar thing we saw then. Literally saying about, like, if end of sentences practice, were they? Sure. No one is. Those items as well. So you said the parents jumping on, echoing these things because they're pre-rehearsed. Preset as part of with their messaging, aligned with the image management for these things, which is where they've spent their time and energy. So during this circumstance, like there's a whole range of the way that they're communicating, and that's not recording.
So, could you tell me what?
So as we saw down, the very first thing we saw there, once she sat down, tried to show that she was taking space, tried to come in looking confident, you saw the lift there of this side of her mouth come through. Contempt is the only one-sided facial micro expression that we have there. Contempt, so feeling of superiority, a range of these other things. That's what we saw the first flash of there as she's come through. So let's watch the rest.
Many different sides to the story and different perspectives, but I just want to say my truth, and I just know myself, and I know I'm not a monster.
So we saw her saying many sides to the story, which, I mean, realistically, while there might be some different perspectives, I agree with what she said. There is only one story, and she's literally the only person left in the world who's able to share what some of the specifics are for that. So now we'll see some of the things that she shares.
Of each other. I mean, we argued, we got back together, we broke up, we got back together. It was rocky, but it was good. It was just, we were in love, young love.
Did you ever feel in your arguments with Dom rage that you couldn't control?
No, it was never like that. It was always just like more, when we'd argue, I would get sad because he didn't really have good communication.
So a couple of things around there. One, notice when they said about Rocky, when she said things were rocky, and about rage, what you saw there is you saw the eye blocking behavior, saw her closing her eyes for a longer period of time. As you've heard me say before, if there's things that we're trying to block out, if there's things that are more of a negative experiences, we say eye blocking normally with negative elements as well. And so that's what you saw twice there. So the one part, obviously rage and about things being rocky, because neither of those reflect back in a good way about the dynamic they had, and so that's why she'd be more mindful of that.
Like 5 in the morning, and we decided to head back to Dom's house, and I remember turning on the street, and then I'm waking up in the hospital the next day, and then my whole life is shattered.
People have said that it's convenient that that's all you remember. What would you say to that?
The whole morning is just like nothing, and it sounds crazy, but like, I'm not gonna like lie just because people want to hear a story. I have no recollection of that morning. I'm not saying I'm innocent. I was a driver of a tragedy, but I'm not a murderer.
So the other part there we saw is when it comes to eye contact, people have a myth that they think people will look away with things if they're being deceptive. More often than not, it's the opposite. Truth tellers convey, liars convince. They use assuming language and convincing elements. They show additional eye contact, which are some of the things we've seen there for a couple of times. You'll see while she's processing some of the responses to share, she'll look off to the side as she's trying to run through those items, and you see there's a bit of change of eye movement, like we saw with her friend earlier on when she's talking about some of the different times when they'd caught up. But then on top of that, and I've literally stopped it right on as you're seeing, like when I mentioned about for contempt, about with one side, I don't believe that you're seeing here somebody who's showing sadness, who's showing remorse. You're seeing somebody here who's adjusted the way that she speaks from a tone and intonation point of view. You're seeing somebody here who's trying to maintain the image and putting forward as somebody to try and be that I had no awareness of this. Somebody's trying to put forward from an innocence point of view. And like I said, I believe just highly focused on image rather than the progression or closing off of these items. But I couldn't have stopped it at a better spot. You can literally see from a contempt point of view the dip there on one side of her face, which we see. So yeah, very indicative.
An expensive designer outfit ready to wear. She had presents ready, wrapped up from Dom that she still has never opened. Nothing makes sense.
So you've heard me say before about that if Dom was to move on, if there was going to be a split up, that it's not just about a relationship, it's just that she loses access. You know, I'm not across the cost for those sort of things, but for that sort of circumstance, there's a fair bit of coin there. And for somebody who her friends had just been describing her as loved herself and image focused and wouldn't even eat a McChicken for these sort of things, the removal of those items from her life, not just the person, would be something that would be, obviously because it would affect from an image point of view, something that would likely be across her followers and all that sort of stuff as well, would be something that she wouldn't want people to be aware of. She wouldn't want to have happen that would change the trajectory of anything that she's putting forward from a public perspective.
Those are all possibilities.
So coming up, we've got an important...
What do you think happened to cause the crash?
Watch your throat.
Through all the evidence that has been presented, the most logical speculation seems to be a medical emergency.
Deep swallow.
I always tell everybody that she has PADS. PADS stands for PAD.
So multiple points around there. Firstly, you saw the saying about rather than responding, what do you think? She didn't put any personal opinion. The most logical element from the evidence we think is a medical episode. I've already shared some initial thoughts on that and why from all the leading elements and the flow and effects that it likely would have had on the body and our ability to do those physical actions. I don't think that's the case. Then on top of that, you saw that pre-rehearsed statement. You saw the hard swallow, which hard swallow, same as things like lip compression, other elements as well as what we see when people have stress and duress, which can be from deceptive behavior. It slows down saliva production, the mouth goes dry, and they do more of that hard swallow. And then the mum, I mean, you heard me say before about convincing behavior. We always tell everybody that she's got that. Not that she just has that. We tell everybody that. Once again, trying to really convince people so they would try and believe this part of the story. Okay, so here's another important bit. Compared to how you're seeing her now speaking during the interview in the prison where she's trying to act sad, let's have a look here when it's from the sentencing point of view, what she actually shows. Look for this area here in the middle of the forehead, the corrugator supercilii. That muscle activates, it brings the eyebrows together and turns them up, aside from other elements that we see and that you would all know about down to her mouth. But watch that part of her face. What's the activation of muscles there?
Wheels as she makes her way down the street. Court renders the following verdicts. Count one.
Sit here.
The court,
Inner part of the
having
eyebrows
count
that are
one
turned
tried
up.
to pursuant to waiver, finds the defendant Mackenzie Shirilla guilty of murder to wit Dominic Russo in violation of Ohio Revised Code section 290.
There's real facial muscle activation that you're seeing now. So some elements of those being emotion driven. Sad more about like being for the sentencing. Now, if you look at compared to when she's getting interviewed now in the prison and saying how sad she is, you're seeing none of that facial muscle activation. So I'll end it there. I'll do another part of the video because it's getting at the end of the 30 minutes. So I'll do that and share this.